Hi, I'm Mr. Stick, and as you can see, I'm a stick. In my last video, I talked about how to enable ReBAR on a Windows upgraded from Windows 7. Since that video was getting long, I promised to get technical on this in another video. So let's get technical with ReBAR. You got a lot of hate for that video, for involving Jay. And I want to take this chance to apologize
to absolutely nobody!
You know, you're just inviting more hate with this. Yep, there's going to be pain. Why do you do this? Just to piss them off. Be warned though, I'm gonna get geeky on your ass. So let's get the pleasantries out of the way. What's ReBAR? It stands for Resizable Bar. Ooh, I love bars! BAR stands for Base Address Register. F you, Stick! You just made bars boring! Now, bars have been in the PCI Express spec, well, before the Express part was added. They let you determine the size of the accessible address space of the device, and you can map it to the system address space. ReBAR is an optional feature which was added with PCI Express 2.1 13 years ago. Remember this for later when I'm going to rant some more on the subject. As the name implies, you can resize your bars through some optional registers on the device. So now, I'm gonna talk dirty to you. So, let's talk about sex, baby, and let's talk about enumeration. You, Stick! Why you gotta ruin everything? That's not dirty. I don't even know if what you said is a word. This is much more interesting. Wouldn't you agree, Barry? You, Stick. Okay. Enumeration is the configuration stage that comes after linkup, which is establishing a connection between the two components on either side of the PCI Express connection. In our case, the graphics card and the CPU. While the linkup stage involves setting the speed and number of lanes used, with a sprinkling of electrical adjustments for signal integrity, the enumeration part involves the CPU reading sets of registers inside the GPU called capabilities. These capabilities are arranged in linked list structures, so one capability will point to the next in the memory. So if you've ever wondered why you had to learn this in high school, now you know they're actually used in the real world. So
what can I say except you're welcome?
As the CPU reads these capabilities, it understands what the GPU is capable of, and it can configure it accordingly. The first PCI Express capability contains the bars, and here's how they're configured. The CPU will write all ones to these registers and read back the value. All ones is just nerd talk for the highest possible value. The value read back contains the information on the size of the bar. The zeros in the least significant bits of the bars tell you the size. So, if you read back this binary value, which has the first 10 bits 0, you know that the size is 2 to the power of 10, which is 1 kilobyte. The next step is to actually write the bars with the base addresses. So, with a 1 kilobyte bar, that GPU could accept transactions from the base address to the base address plus 1024 minus 1, because we're counting from 0. With ReBAR, you skip writing all ones and just read the supported sizes. You pick the size, and the spec recommends you pick the largest one possible, and you write your base address. Do you ever get the feeling that you're being watched? Probably just my imagination. Here's how my 3060's bars look like without ReBAR on. There are 3 bars. From the address ranges, we can work out that the first one is 16 megabytes, the second is 256 megabytes, and the third is 32 megabytes. But Stick, doesn't your graphics card have 12 gigabytes of VRAM? Did Barry tell you to say that?
He lost a bet.
Well, yes it does.
So with the megabyte and gigabyte, what's the discrepancy?
Discrepancy, you idiot.
Now, I don't really know how this is done in reality, but technically, the GPU itself could request something and the data returned doesn't have an address, so it can be put anywhere. There are other options where the memory controller transfers the data in the larger VRAM as needed. Okay, now here's how the bars look like with rebar on. You can see now that we have the same 16 megabyte bar, followed by a 16 gigabyte bar, and finally the 32 megabyte bar. Now, 16 gigabytes is larger than 12 gigabytes. Duh. And this is what exploits are built on, because the GPU is forced to accept accesses in those extra 4 gigabytes. But it's so easy to fix a weakness like this that I'm sure there's no exploit available. So it seems like rebar is doing what Nvidia is saying it is. Intel says this about rebar for their ARC GPUs.
Resizable bar is a PCI Express feature, and what it does is it allows transactions that originate on the CPU, like reads and writes, that are targeting GPU memory, to be bigger. So basically, if resizable bar is off and you're trying to read or write a large memory region, you're going to do a lot of little transactions.
And I'll tell you now that they are both wrong and also right. Bipolar much? Okay, it's true that you get a larger bar with rebar on, but here's why they're wrong. You could have a 1 terabyte bar. Your memory writes will still get split into the same number of chunks. Why? Because MPS. Is that supposed to sound smart? MPS is the maximum payload size that a PCI Express transfer can have, and the maximum MPS for PCI Express is 4 kilobytes. So anything you transfer will get split into at most 4 kilobytes. There is no getting around that. As an exercise, let's check out my card. Pre-rebar, MPS is 1. So looking at the fancy schmancy table from the PCI Express spec, we see that MPS 1 means 256 bytes. So all traffic to my GPU is split into 256 byte chunks. Now, after rebar, MPS is the same. So you ain't sending fewer transfers.
So is Intel lying?
Well, not necessarily.
Say what?
They're probably talking about DMA. What's DMA, you ask? No one's asking. Well, I'm going to talk about it anyway. Now, since the dawn of computers, we've known that memory is slow. And waiting for it means that you can't do anything else. This is where DMA comes in. Direct memory access in one form or another is what all modern systems use to access memory. So you tell a bit of hardware to read or write something, and then you go on with other work. When the task is done, you get a notification and you know your data is ready in the memory. So this is what they probably mean when they say
fewer, bigger transactions.
You can program the DMA to get a larger chunk of data and not have to reprogram it as often. Now, DMAs are more complicated than this, and some have features like looping around the memory range, but it's probably not something that Intel has, hence the performance penalty without rebar. So what about Nvidia? Well, Nvidia definitely doesn't have this issue. Otherwise, turning rebar on would increase performance across the board, which is not the case. They have 17 games which they claim benefit from rebar, which probably means that there are 17 games that are not optimizing for Nvidia's GPU memory controllers. So, coming back to my original CSM issue from the F*** You Jay video, basically CSM and rebar don't work together, which I found quite weird. But actually thinking about it more, I start to understand why this is the case. What's happening with GPUs is that they work in compatibility mode by default. Remember how the second bar from my GPU went from 256 megabytes to 16 gigabytes? Well, that's the GPU straight up lying to your motherboard.
Just like my wife.
And this is because if you have a 32-bit operating system, you will not be able to map any other device in the address space. So if you want to support backwards compatibility, you have to support the bugs as well. In this case, the GPU limitations. Tom Scott has a great video on this.
Backwards compatibility within reason.
And I'll link to it in the description. How come you don't talk as nice as him? We're voiced by the same guy, so you're basically picking on yourself here. Nice dodge. So, could accessing the whole VRAM be done without rebar? Yes. Any GPU could open up the whole address space using the original bar programming mechanism, but it won't be backwards compatible. As a final thought, I checked the PCI Express bus usage in Borderlands 3. I saw peak usage of 15% of the PCI Express 4 bandwidth. That would mean 30% on PCI Express 3 and 60% on PCI Express 2.1, which just added features such as ReBAR over 2.0, but had the same bandwidth. And that's just peak usage. Most of the time it was less than 5%. So really, you could run modern games on PCI Express too. Just saying. And if you like this video, just give me a thumbs down. You'll have the same frame rate regardless.
Are you sure you want to do this?
Yep. You're just asking for trouble now.
Still gonna do it. Here goes.
F*** you, Jay.